humility is the foundation of leadership. And oftentimes managers will say, how do I draw my team to me? Well, arrogance repels and humility attracts. So a contrite spirit always attracts people. Everybody loves a humble person.
Welcome to Iron Summit, the podcast where we dive deep into the art and science of becoming your best self, blending expert insights on strength training, smart recovery, optimal nutrition, and mindset mastery to help you elevate your game.
All right, we're back with another episode with John G. Miller. He's a speaker on personal accountability, author of QBQ. Got my book right here. The Question Behind the Question, Flipping the Switch, Outstanding 47 Ways to Make Your Organization. And also co-author of Raising Accountable Kids, which I think is really cool. Co-author with your wife.
Yep.
Max has actually just recently became a dad as well. So we want to get into that as well. But John, great to have you on.
Thank you, Ryan and Max. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I really appreciated reading your book. I think, personal accountability is such a great topic. And I think sports teach it very well. And I know we have a connection with wrestling. You were a wrestler growing up. Your dad coached at Cornell for 25 years. What exactly made you come up with the idea of QBQ?
Great question, Ryan. Again, thank you for having me here. Let me just give you a little background. That's always helpful. When I left Cornell, I graduated from Cornell in 1980 and had my 19-year-old wife with me, and I was 22, and we moved out west with a big corporation. About 5 years later, I decided I wasn't very good at sitting at a desk all day, 8 to 5. And we lived in southern Minnesota, Montana, Missouri, back to Minnesota. And a friend one day said to me, why don't you get into sales? And I thought, oh, no, I could never sell. Well, I didn't realize that was my calling. So I started interviewing and found a position selling in Minneapolis, St. Paul, management training. So I was calling on executives. And that's a key point. I'm sitting down with VPs and CEOs and directors and HR people talking about their business. And I'm only 27 years old. And so I'm learning. And then I started running these workshops with my mentor, the man who hired me. I'm using his content. And well, I did that for 10 years and got pretty good at it, selling training. And after about 10 years, I left my mentor, as all mentees should. I grew beyond him, if you know what I mean. And I moved on. And I decided I could do this on my own. I could go out and be a speaker and all that. And here's the key. When I was sitting in those workshops for 10 years with clients, I would hear questions that I thought were harmful, questions that pointed at other people like, when is that department going to more for us? Why can't they do their job right? When am I going to get more training? Why do we have to go through all this change? So I was hearing these questions. And one day I got up in front of a group and I said, why don't we turn the question around? And instead of asking, when is someone going to train me? How about asking, how can I develop myself? Sounds simple, right? Well, it is, but it takes mental discipline, just like wrestling, on the mat and all that. It takes a lot of mental discipline to stop pointing at someone else and start asking, what can I do differently? So I taught this idea. And I said it was the question behind the question. That's what I called it. And it very quickly got labeled the QBQ because, we all love acronyms. So all of a sudden it's the QBQ. And I was known as the QBQ guy. This was, hate to date myself, but this was 30 years ago. It was 1995. So I started going out and speaking on personal accountability and this little thing, this idea called QBQ. Well, it took off. And so then we started writing books. And all these years later, my daughter, who was born in 1983, she's out there. She's been working with me 17 years teaching QBQ. And so as a millennial, she's out talking about, hey, let's not blame, let's practice accountability. And I'm still speaking. And we do a lot of other things at our company as well. But we are a training company based in Denver, and it's all about accountability.
That's awesome. Man, we can, I think I'm really excited for this topic because I think personal accountability is something that is with a lot of groups going by the wayside. So I think I love your emphasis on it and the fact that you have been doing this for 30 years. So excited to,
yeah. It makes me old, Max.
Yeah. Well, old, wise, experienced.
Right. Thank you. Here's what's interesting. When I first started and I wanted to be a speaker, and not just sell training anymore, a woman sat me down and said, "You can't talk about personal accountability. It's not a topic." I was literally told I couldn't go out and market myself as an accountability speaker. It's not a topic. Because, if you work for a corporation, as Ryan, maybe you do, the topics are often customer service and team building and sales and motivation and diversity and all these things. And I said to her, but I think personal accountability comes before every other topic. You've got to start with a foundation of personal accountability. So I was dumb enough to try. So I went out, started talking about personal accountability, and a little company called State Farm found me for one session, and that turned into 73 events. Merck Pharmaceutical found me, that turned into 25 events. All of a sudden, I was off and running, and we left Minneapolis in the Arctic tundra, and we moved to Denver so we could get 300 days of sunshine a year. And you guys know all about that.
Yep. Big misconception about Colorado.
I love it. Yeah, that is a great point. You leave Minnesota and everybody probably was like, "Oh, you're going to another cold spot," but Denver's pretty mild.
They don't get it.
That's so true.
So when you started to get traction with this and QBQ became a big deal, what were the biggest pushbacks you got or biggest issues? I mean, I love it starts with yourself. You can really only change yourself.
Right.
But what was like maybe the top one or two things that people would push back on you at these speaking events about the question behind the question and personal accountability?
Well, the key, not objection, but a pushback's a good word, is sometimes people hiring us would say, "Okay, we want you to talk about accountability, but how are you going to frame it so it's a positive message?" Meaning, you don't want to come in and tell an audience, "You need to be more accountable. You folks are the problem." We don't do that. Kristen, my daughter, and I, we've just learned, and it comes to experience, just like on the mat, right? You make mistakes, you learn. I won't do that again. You've got to come across as a speaker you got to be humble. I'm proud of my humility. You've got to be humble. You've got to teach it so the audience knows it's for you too. For me, John Miller, father of 7, grandfather to almost 15. We have one on the way. And
That's awesome.
Thank you. Husband, 45 years, professional speaker, sales guy. I need this message. So the only real pushback, Ryan, was sometimes people would say, "How are you going to teach it so my audience loves it, enjoys it, has fun with it, and walks away using it?" Well, that's just what we've learned to do. We know how to teach it. So nobody says, "Oh, he came in to beat us up." We're not there to beat people up. We're there to help us all do a better job of eliminating blame from our families and from our corporation.
What are a couple practical ways to be able to teach someone without being critical or trying to push on it? Like, give us a couple ways you do that. Because I, as a coach, I think about this all the time. It's hard to push someone without being, critical or coming across that way.
I understand. Well, humility is the foundation of leadership. And oftentimes managers will say, "How do I draw my team to me?" Well, arrogance repels and humility attracts. So a contrite spirit always attracts people. Everybody loves a humble person. And so here's a good example. Yes, Ryan, I happen to have a copy of QBQ right there. How about that? The author has his own book. I never forget, I was out speaking at a pharmaceutical firm, and I was teaching an audience, if you're going to give the book to your team, the way you give it to someone else is say, "Hey, I've read this book twice. I really needed it. I'm going to give you all a copy. And as you read it, would you come to me and let me know how I'm doing using it?" Then people will go, "Well, amen, brother. I'll take the book and read it," because they want to tell the boss what's going wrong and what they're not doing. But then all of a sudden they read it and they go, "Oh, this was for me." Well, I had a pharmaceutical manager. I said to the group, I said, "Don't hand the book out and basically say, 'Hey, everybody, you need this.'" And she came up to me later and sheepishly said, "Oh boy, that's exactly what I did. I handed your book out to my team and I told them they needed this." So it's all about asking, what can I do to change me, showing humility to others. And let's be honest, who doesn't need more accountability? Name one person on earth who couldn't practice a little less blame, a little less victim thinking, and a little more accountability. And that starts with John Miller.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I do love in the book, you keep coming back to that point too, where you're like, "Hey, I'm writing this book for myself as well." And I think that comes through, that humility comes through really well. I also love the examples, the real world examples really made it, like, painted that picture very well. what do you do in terms of like, maybe you feel like, you had a bad day and you feel like some personal accountability is slipping? How do you like check yourself? Aside from, I think another great option is like you're saying, like keep reviewing and reading a book again. But how do you hold yourself accountable in staying accountable, I guess, when stuff slips?
That's great. And I'm going to go back to something you just said, because if I don't mention it now, I'll probably forget it. You mentioned the examples in the book. My dad was Cornell wrestling coach for 25 years, but he was also a pastor in a church for 40 years. He had a very interesting career. I would get out of bed every day, pastor, wrestling coach. I'd have to ask, which one will he be? little different every day. But there was a famous pastor who once said, if I'm not telling a story, I'm preaching. Stories are so powerful. And so in the QBQ book, that's what you're referring to, Ryan, is those examples, those stories about people who went above and beyond, didn't blame, asked, how can I serve others? Those people just love those stories. If an audience member ever has seen me speak before, and now I'm going to speak again today to a different company, but they're there, they will always be disappointed if I don't tell the favorite story from the book, their favorite story. So just even for coaches, obviously there are many times we just tell people what to do when we coach, but we also, the human brain loves a good story. So stories are important. How do I check myself? Well, because QBQ has been such a part of our life for so many years, it's kind of fun in our family. I'm going to give you an honest one. Okay. All right. Just before this podcast started, I came out of the bathroom and I said to my wife, Karen, I said, who put the toilet paper on wrong backwards? Who put that backwards? And we both laughed because we both know in this QBQ environment, we're not supposed to ask who did it and why is this happening to me and when are people going to do it right? So Ryan and Max, the QBQ is just part of our family culture. It doesn't mean we're perfect. Doesn't mean we never complain or whine or judge other people. It just means we're very aware when we've asked a lousy question like, why don't others do this or that? When will they serve me? Who made the mistake? The minute we say those kinds of questions around this big family, everybody knows it was the wrong question to ask. And we have a laugh and then we go back to, okay, QBQ, what can I do now to solve the problem? How can I move forward?
That is awesome. I want to, and this is something I've thought about a lot in myself. When you move forward and you ask, what can I do? Like, let's use the toilet paper as an example. What can I do? I can put it on, right? Yeah, you fix the dang toilet paper. And I think we all need a lot of that. Yeah. But how do you also make sure you don't bend your own boundaries, constantly fix things for others, kind of head down that pathway?
We have a chapter in the book, Max, that addresses that. I was speaking for a group and then leaving and coming down an elevator. And there was a woman in the elevator who had just been in my session and she's just looking at the jacket of the QBQ book. And suddenly she says to me, so what you're saying is I should solve everybody else's problems? Or I should do other people's work? And I remember thinking, whoa, how did you get that message? I never said never. This is a boundary issue, Max. And as we grow in life, and I'm just a tad older than you two, as we grow in life with our spouses, our kids, our neighbors, our friends, we hopefully start to learn about boundaries. And so, there's some things we can fix, some things we should address, and there's other things you have to ask. Well, we call it the ultimate QBQ, and it's in the book. The ultimate QBQ, the ultimate question behind the question is this: how can I let go of what I can't control? If you know any person, I like to ask audiences this: hey, how many of you know somebody who's controlling? And they always laugh and raise their hand because we all know controlling people. They're bossy, they're micromanagers, they're controlling, they're possibly narcissistic. The minute I ask that question, I say, well, how many of those controlling people do you think would ever ask the ultimate QBQ, how can I let go of what I can't control? And we all know they don't ask that. The controlling people never step back and say, okay, this is not my business. I don't need to be in charge. So, I was telling you guys before we started that I was a referee in college. That's my real shirt from the 70s. It really is. I'm not kidding.
It's awesome.
Referees, it's so much fun being a referee because you are in charge. I mean, I was 21 when I told a high school coach to sit down because he was yelling at me too much. But we can't go through life being the referee. We can't solve everybody's relational problems. We can't do that. We have to let go. So part of the QBQ book is those boundaries and knowing when to back off.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that was a great question, Max. You say in QBQ there's 2 myths surrounding accountability. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, Ryan. And if you've ever worked for a company, you've seen these. The first myth is we think it's a team thing. Over the past few decades, there's been some content that has crept into organizations like there are no I's in team. Baloney. Every team is full of I's. And that's the great thing about the wrestling. Come on, let's be honest. You're on a team, but you're not really on a team. Come on. Because when you're out on that mat getting pinned, and I had that experience a lot, all right? There's nobody helping you. There's nobody going to address that problem. You have to solve that problem. So that's the great thing about wrestling is you are the I at that moment. There are many I's in team. Like, let me just look at our family. We have 7 kids. When the I's take care of themselves, when Kristen, Tara, Michael, Molly, Charlene, Jadzia, and Tasha all take care of themselves, the team is stronger. But in the corporate world, especially, we've allowed this myth to creep in that accountability is a team thing or a group thing. So we start using oxymorons, words that clash, like accountability groups, shared accountability, team accountability. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't want any emails from your listeners that I don't like teams. But here's the key about teams. Teams are strong when individuals practice personal accountability. You might know the name Brad Stevens in the basketball world. He was the coach at Butler who took the team to the Final Four twice. Then he went on to Philadelphia. Reason I mention him, yeah, I'm dropping a big name, I guess, for basketball fans. But he found the QBQ book and he emailed me. This was 10, 12 years ago. And he said, I use this book so when my players come off during a timeout, they don't say, he's not covering his man. He wanted his players to say, what can I do differently on the court? And that's what makes a great team is when individuals focus on themselves and don't blame and point fingers. So the first myth of accountability is we think it's a team thing. No, it's a me thing. And the second myth is we think it's something I do to others. And you mostly see this in the management of people or in parenting. I sold management training for 10 years. I sat in workshops for 10,000 hours, and I saw this happen a lot. Some manager would say, I'm going to call my team in Tuesday, and we're going to have that meeting. It's time for me to hold everybody
accountable.
That is not what we're talking about with QBQ. Now, that's a whole different topic, management skills. And most middle managers are not trained very well today. They get promoted for the wrong reasons. But management is all about still looking in the mirror. How can I change me? So a lot of managers will start out thinking, I need to change my team, instead of asking, how can I be a better coach for my people? What can I do to get to know each person as an individual? I mean, it's the same thing with coaching, Max. How can I get to know what motivates, what inspires each individual wrestler? Because they're all different. They're all different. And then, of course, in parenting, and that's why we wrote the parenting. This book, Parenting, Raising Accountable Kids.
Iron Summit is brought to you by Bridge Athletic. Looking for a way to streamline your training programs and deliver exceptional results? Check out our friends at Bridge Athletic. Their platform is packed with over 300 templates and 1,500 instructional videos, courtesy of subject matter experts like Exos, FMS, and Hyperice, making program design both efficient and impactful. Our listeners can take advantage of an exclusive offer. For a limited time, get your first 30 days free and your next month at 50% off when you use code IRONSUMMIT, all caps. That's code IRONSUMMIT, no spaces, all caps, for 30 days free plus 50% off your second month at bridgeathletic.com. Check it out and start assigning custom programs directly to your athlete's mobile device.
We sent out an email when it was ready to go, going on the market, to parents who had signed up for a list saying, hey, it's ready. And a lot of parents came back with us and said, oh, great, a book I can use to get my teenage daughter to speak to me respectfully. Great, a book I can use to get my Gen Z son off the couch and out into the workforce. Uh-oh, I'm sorry, you guys are both Gen Zers probably.
I don't know. I'm
Okay.
on the bubble.
What year were you born? You want to tell us?
1992.
1992. Yeah, you're a millennial. Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm not one of those stupid Gen Zers like Ryan.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm Gen Z or not.
Just kidding. I'm going to ask, how can I be better and support people like Ryan?
Well, heaven forbid a baby boomer. Thanks, boomer. But anyway, parents said, "Oh, great, thank you, John and Karen, for a book I can use to change my children." And we always wondered what they thought when they got to the book and they read page two, where we said, "Your child is a product of your parenting." Now, don't get me wrong. I understand the culture affects our kids, friends affect our kids, church leaders, Boy Scout leaders, school districts, teachers, everybody can affect our children to some extent. But the minute we go there, we're blaming. But the minute we say, you know what, my child is a product of my parenting, how can I improve my parenting skills? Then we are practicing personal accountability. So that parenting book is not for the children, it's for mom and dad. So the two myths are, we think it's a team thing, it's not. Or we think it's something I do to other people. No, it's something I use myself.
That is awesome. I love that. I've also heard, and that parenting example rings very true with me right now. Just being a new dad, but also Ryan just got a dog. So,
okay. Well, that
not the same, but I've
Max,
heard
that's
the
funny
saying,
you put me in the same boat as you having a kid. I appreciate that.
I'm not. It's a whole different ball game.
If your dog is not trained, it's your fault. Period.
I've heard the saying, there's no such thing as a bad dog, just a bad dog owner.
Yep, bad
That's
Ryan.
Interesting.
Yep, bad Ryan. Well, let's pick on the Gen Z
I'm
guy.
gonna give credit to my wife because Bear, our little dog Bear, she's been pretty great. So I guess it's probably to Chloe's credit. I don't know about because I don't know what I'm doing training a dog.
Well, I have to tell you, we had a Malamute for 11 years named Bear. So there you go.
There you go. That's awesome.
That is really cool. What are some ways? Because Ryan and I focus a lot on two things on this podcast generally. One is wrestling, which I think it's really obvious where personal accountability is. Like wrestling magnifies personal accountability. And I think that's one of the special things about that sport is there is no, you lose, it's all on you. You win, it's all on you. I think it's one of the last true ways to learn personal accountability through life. Without going and really practicing it or seeking out resources like yours. But another thing Ryan and I talk about a lot is just general health and fitness, lifestyle. And so can you take us through kind of some of the ways people can practice personal accountability, not just in the workforce or parenting, but with themselves, whether it's like they want to eat healthy or get to the gym regularly?
Okay. Max, you're getting me excited here because this is not new. I didn't invent this idea, but can I just share another story? Meineke called to hire me, the president of Meineke. I get very few calls from executives at that level. It's just not the way the world works. But he called, his name was Paul, and he said, John, I have a meeting next Tuesday in Charlotte. It was like a week prior. You have the date open? I said, yes. And every speaker likes to get booked at the last minute if you have an open date. He said, John, I have not read your QBQ book, but a friend told me about it. And most of our leads come from someone who's read the book. Okay. He says, can you sum up your message for me? Because I need a speaker next Tuesday. He had 600 franchisees coming in who run Meineke's. And I said, sure, Paul, about 6 words. No excuses. I own the result.
There you go.
He said, you're hired. And a week later, I was in Charlotte speaking for Meineke, and basically what I taught is, hey, no excuses. I own the result, and that's not a mean thing to say. It's just like, well, a typical retailer, if you know much about the business world, they're going to blame their location, the people they hire, the boss, their manager. They're going to blame the other department instead of saying no excuses. I own the result. That's the power of personal accountability. So when it comes to health and fitness, I did not love wrestling. You know why I wrestled? Because my dad, Jimmy Miller, was a national AAU champion in the 40s 2 times. and missed the 48 Olympics by a match or two, thanks to Bill Cole, Rob Cole's dad. Okay? But my dad was Mr. Wrestling in Ithaca, New York, Coach Cornell all those years. You know why I wrestled? Because my dad was Jimmy Miller. And that's another story. We should never make our children do anything that they don't want to do. I wish I'd played baseball. I wish I'd played tennis. But anyway, the point is, when I left wrestling, and I actually took my junior year off. Now, you have to understand, when the Jimmy Miller son decides to skip his high school junior year and not wrestle, all of a sudden, Andy Noel, the former coach at Cornell and the athletic director for 30 years, will show up at your house to try to talk you into wrestling because your dad sent him there. Okay. So when I left wrestling for a year, I came back my senior year and I made captain and got pinned as much as I didn't lose, as much as I won. And then I left wrestling. I can't say I was very good at staying in shape. I don't like running. I wasn't good at it. I wasn't built for running. I don't like to lift weights. It's one reason I wasn't a great wrestler. So I want the audience to know you're not talking to some zealot when it comes to fitness, like Max here. I'm not a fitness zealot, but I started speaking in 95. I'm flying around the country. I'm eating peanuts on the plane. I'm eating bread pudding and room service in the hotels. I'm speaking. I'm getting back on a plane. I'm flying home. And I wrestled 132 my senior year in high school. And suddenly I'm weighing 195. And I'm only 5'6", guys. So what do you think? Do the math. Do the math.
Yeah, do the math. Yeah.
In 2012, one day I quietly said, after 5 pairs of slacks, pants did not fit me, this is terrible. And so I walked around the block, and the next day I walked around the block twice, and then I walked 2 miles. And over the last 13, 14 years, I have walked, and I've walked, and I have walked, and I've stopped eating ice cream at 9 p.m., and I've walked, and I've lost 45 pounds and kept it off. Not because I'm an amazing person, but because I chose to stop making excuses. The excuses used to be, I'm too busy. I travel. I have to eat in hotels. You can't eat healthy when you travel. We don't have any nice places to walk where I live in Denver. A lot of just dirt roads. It's kind of boring. Looks like Western Kansas, So, and you guys can relate to what I just said. So excuse making was there. I wasn't a fitness nut, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I wasn't a fitness person. And on top of that, I made all these excuses, and all of a sudden I'm weighing 195. So I started exercising, and I lost a lot of pounds, and I feel great. So it is, Max, to your question, it's about not making excuses. Everybody can have an excuse. I'd also stay away from the fad diet, but maybe that's a different topic. My sister was a gymnast for Springfield College back in the 70s and did quite well. And she just today on the phone was saying, the best diet is still pushing yourself away from the table. My 75-year-old sister just said that to me today.
That's awesome.
Because, I said, I still have the problem. I eat too much. I can't have 1 plate of spaghetti. I have to have 2.5. And I wonder sometimes if it comes from my wrestling days when we starved ourselves from November to February. But that's an excuse. So anyway, bottom line, no excuses.
Love it.
I think that's great. I want to ask you a little bit more about, obviously you were super busy with your career, right? You're traveling, you're writing books, you're going to speak at events. You have 7 children. I think how did you balance all this, right? Like a lot of traveling in your career, a busy career, a wife and 7 kids, at home. How did you think about, trying to set your family up financially, trying to, be there and present with your kids, trying to, be a spouse to your wife? How did you balance all that with all these different plates you were spinning at the same time?
You know what? We should have just stuck with dogs. Should have just stuck with dogs. I thought you were going to ask me, how did you achieve 7 children? And I didn't know if we had to go there, Ryan. Well, I'm going to tell you how we achieved 7 children. 4 came the homemade way, and 3 came through adoption. Awesome. So it was the summer of 2000, and we had 4 kids, ages 17 down to 10. And the short story is we adopted 3 sisters, full-blood sisters. The parents were alcoholics and drug addicts. The parents had fled. They were in the county system. They were 5, 3, and 1. And we adopted them. We're not saints. We're not heroes. We thought it would be easy. It wasn't. And that's where QBQ really came into play. Those daughters are now 30, 28, and 26, that kind of age. And that's how we got to 7 children. And that was 2000, but 2005, I remember my wife calling me. I was on a hotel bed in Omaha. She said, I need you to stop traveling so much. I said, okay, I'll raise my fee. So I raised my fee and I got hired more the next year. That's a statement of selling and value. You can actually raise prices and do better business. Nobody wants to hire a speaker that only charges that, because if they only charge that, they must not be very good. So there was stress, there was tension on the marriage from 2000 to say 2010, when the kids were all really young and the older ones were going off to college, and mom's trying to manage that process, and then the little ones are still here in middle school and then high school. How do we make it work? Strong woman. My wife, she may only be 4'11" and a half, but she's a strong woman and she knows wrestling, except she calls a duck under an underduck. We need to deal with that.
An underdog.
That's a true story. Okay.
I like that. We might need to change a duck under.
Yeah,
to an
we'll
underdog.
switch it.
Well, I don't even know if they do duck unders anymore. I watch these ESPN NCAA finals, and I don't recognize a lot of the wrestling today from when I wrestled, but that's probably another podcast too. But lots of stress, lots of tension, and I make no claim to fame. I wasn't the perfect husband, Ryan, or anything like that. I will say this. Let me say this. Marital counseling is a great tool. In the old days, counseling had stigma. Now, I think, to be honest with you, too many people are running to therapists for everything because we all have triggers, But, and we're in the middle, there's always a gray area, and the pendulums swing too far. Somewhere in that middle, you got marital issues, you got relational problems, man, get to a counselor, because sometimes couples will just go around and around and around on the same issues, the same arguments, they say the same things. They use the wrong words like never and you always, and they just got to get to a third-party facilitator. So in many ways, Max, the answer to your question is strong woman, great mom. I used my QBQ and we got to marital counseling. And here we are 45 years later, or 45 years into the marriage. We are empty nesters. All 7 kids are married and they're all they're out of the house and no one is coming back. Trust me. There are no boomerang children in this family. They are all out there making a living, working, married, having kids. So there you go.
You've obviously done quite a bit of parenting. So 45 years married. These are impressive things. Why did you decide to write your book about raising accountable kids?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. That's one of the easiest answers, because the market asked for it. Here's what would happen. I'd go out and speak. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, like, oh, Millers, please write a book for us. No, I'd go out and speak on QBQ, personal accountability, getting rid of blame, victim thinking, procrastination, finger pointing, whining, and entitlement. Did you get that list? I'd go out and talk about these things. And after a session, a person would come up, and 80% of the world has children. And so they'd come up and they'd go, oh, I can use this at home, but do you have it in a parenting format? Do you have it written for parents? And I'd say, no, but you can use it. It still works at home. Like the farmer's insurance father who went home and said to his boys, ages 10 and 7, how can I be a better dad? He listened to the QBQ and he went right home and said, how can I be a better dad? And the 7-year-old gave him a hug and the 10-year-old gave him a lip. All the things he could do better. But, you really got to just, the people were asking for the QBQ to be in a parenting format. And so finally we just buckled down and my wife and I wrote it. And if you want to talk about the need for teamwork, try to write a book with your spouse. Wow. Thank heavens we had a referee. Okay. His name was John Duff and he was the Penguin Random House publisher editor. He would email us back our chapters and he'd say, okay, this needs to be fixed and this needs to be fixed. And so anyway, that takes real teamwork.
That is funny. For sure. I can't. That is,
I don't know if you know this, but you can write something and be really proud of it. and someone else will read it and they'll go, I have no idea what you just said. Really.
Totally can see that. I can totally see that. No, that is, I mean, raising 7 kids, and that's you definitely know what you're doing. So I'm
Thank you.
interested in that one.
Thank you. And I'm going to say something else. In the book, Raising Accountable Kids, we have a chapter on setting, designing, knowing, communicating your absolutes. You've got to have absolutes as a parent. So let me give you a simple example that's in the book. As our kids emerged from tweens to teens, we said no R-rated movies. There was no discussion. There was no debate. There was no caveat. There were no exceptions. We will not watch R-rated movies. Don't need them hearing that language. Certainly don't need them, seeing images that they should never see and can't unsee. That's a simple absolute. We said no R-rated movies in this family, and we stuck with that. So there's lots of things you can do absolutes around, but that's just an example of one, and we never bent.
How do you hold the line with something like that? If, obviously kids have friends and other parents have different types of rules and stuff like that. How
Good
do you think
question.
about that stuff?
Well, obviously, we can't control what goes on in other homes. So that was
Yep.
that was always a risk. We knew that. We knew that. And sure, sometimes they'd go to a friend's house and watch a movie full of F words that we would never have watched in this house. But one time I do remember, see, we have 6 daughters and only 1 son. And I remember Michael calling once saying, hey, Dad, they want to watch this movie. I forgot what it was. And I said, please don't. Let me talk to the father. And he understood, and they did not watch that movie. It's not easy to do some of that stuff. By the way, I took my son to one wrestling practice, and I brought him home. This book, that's the story. I got to tell you, this story, you don't have Flipping the Switch yet, do you, Ryan? Huh? And Max, come on, Flipping. It's the sequel to QB. I took my son, age 10, to one wrestling practice. I thought, I'm going to have a wrestler. Nope. He came home. And my wife said, and my wife likes the sport of wrestling. She appreciates it. She grew up around it. She said, so Mike, how was the wrestling practice? And he goes, I don't want to go back. How come, Mike? Those boys are sweating. They're all sweating. He did not want to be touching young boys. He didn't want to grapple. He didn't want to be on the mat. He found it to not be to his liking. What else can I say? He didn't like it. So he went off because he had musical talent. He could dance and he could act. So he did drama all through high school. And he was just amazing. And I would go to his drama performance and a tear would come to my eye watching my son sing and tap and wow the crowd with his acting. And then he went off and he got married to Casey May, his wife, and had 3 boys. And I don't know if any of them will wrestle, but I let that go a long time ago.
That's awesome. No, I think that's probably one of the most important things you can do as a parent is let your kids kind of choose their own path.
He had one experience. He didn't like it. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
You guys, you grew up on the mat. We all grew up on the mat. We all know what it's like out there, but he did not enjoy the process.
Well, I think and Ryan, we've talked about it a little bit. It's definitely something my parents did really well. Like wrestling was always a choice. It was never something I had to do, as if you want to do it. And I think that's probably, and I think about this a lot with coaching youth in high school wrestling. Wrestling is too hard of a sport to do for someone else, just like you said. Yeah. You have to really want to do it yourself and want to pursue it. And as a parent, you can support that decision or support the decision not to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I watch you guys win championships and stuff, and I know the dedication you've had since you were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I just wasn't that dedicated to the sport. I didn't enjoy it enough. And I wrestled from, 5th grade to 12th grade, except for my junior year. And it taught me a lot, mostly a positive experience. But the problem is, and I have 2 brothers, they're older than I am. None of us came close to achieving on the mat what my dad achieved.
So taking that a little bit further, I totally agree with you and understand, like, you don't want to force your kids into stuff. How do you think about like tough love on something where it's good for them, but they don't want to do it? Like I think about when I was young, like it was maybe we'd be at a restaurant and I was being shy or something and didn't want to order for myself or something. And my parents like, no, you need to like speak for yourself and learn to like communicate with people and not have like I don't know, like a social anxiety with a waiter because they're older than you, right? So how do you balance that line with I think like with a sport, it's obvious maybe a little more obvious where it's like, hey, they really didn't enjoy the sport. That's fine. Try something else.
Yeah.
But if you know it's good for them, but they kind of need the tough love, how do you think about that in your parenting style?
Let me ask you a question, Ryan. When you go to a restaurant now, do you order for yourself?
Yeah.
And I guess it worked. I mean, that is the judgment of parenting that happens every single day. Like you've got two kids in a spat and you try to figure out what happened and you try to not encourage blame, but you're still trying to solve the problem. Who
Yeah.
hit who? You know, when Michael was 5 and Molly was 3, and they'd say, well, he hit me and she bit me and he kicked me. We'd say, you know what, just bite each other again and get it over with. You can't tell. But you got to teach those good things. Like, you know, your mom and dad were trying to teach you, Ryan, to do an adult thing, talk to a waiter, talk to a server, order something, just learn those kinds of adult skills. You could use other examples. College kids that are being enabled in some way. Maybe mom and dad are filling out all the applications while the kid's on video games. I mean, come on, that's called enabling and covering for your child, and they're not learning anything.
Yeah.
So then you're parenting, and I know, Max, you're a new parent. Ryan, you have a dog. I get all that. There are going to be a million judgment moments where you have to decide, and that's in many ways how the absolutes in parenting come into play. Like I have a story where I won't get into details, but a guest came to our house. One of our kids was not friendly, almost rude to that guest, and then went to her bedroom. And I went right in there and said, you get back out here and say hello to our guest, because that is the way we live life in this family. Kristen, our oldest, who speaks on QBQ, she's 42. She'll tell you a story about the time right in this house in Denver, Colorado. She once was angry and went up to her bedroom and slammed the door. We had an absolute no slamming doors. And my wife, Karen, was in there in a nanosecond and informing her, you will never slam this door again. She was like 15. You've got to take on those tough issues and teach your children. That's if you want to call that tough love, call it tough love.
Yeah. So it's figuring out those boundaries, those absolutes. Making an absolute you're gonna wrestle is probably not a wise one. Like that's probably crossing the line the other way. But you're gonna have a conversation with this waiter and order like an adult. That's a positive, or probably or don't slam a door.
Right.
These are absolutes that apply to everything in life and aren't just pleasing your parents.
I thank you. I've got a quick, great story that demonstrates this. In 1974, when I was 16, and I announced, heaven forbid, a Jimmy Miller's son is not going to wrestle. My father did not handle it well. He did not take it well. He was still at Cornell coaching. It was his last year. There were some arguments. I didn't want to wrestle. I had a girlfriend. I wanted to come home, watch Star Trek reruns. I wanted to do something different after school from November to March instead of always going into the wrestling room at 3:30. I had done that for too long. After the arguments, I remember one day I ran down to my room, didn't slam the door. My father, coach and pastor, Jimmy Miller, he came down and he said exactly the right thing. Okay, if you're not going to wrestle, that's fine, but you need to go tell Coach Turco personally, face to face, man to man. Coach Orlando Turco, who had wrestled for my dad in the 50s at Cornell, who's now the Ithaca High wrestling coach. So the next day after school, I walked into that wrestling room on November 5th and said, Coach, I am not wrestling this year. That was the smartest thing my dad could have taught me, to not just disappear from the wrestling room and never show up again, but to go in and tell the coach man to man, this is my plan. I'm taking a year off. So that's a good moment for my father as a parent. And he was far from perfect, as we all are, but that was a moment when he taught me to do the right thing.
At Iron Summit, we are about getting everything we can out of our workouts and everyday lives. If you aren't wearing a pair of barefoot or wide toe box trainers, you are leaving gains on the table. The Sashi Athletics Ronin Ichi Minimalist Trainer is a perfect barefoot shoe. Not only does it perform like other major brands on the market, it is actually good looking. Even my wife says so. Get a pair today for 10% off with the code IronSummit10. Link is in the bio.
Yeah, that's super interesting too at time. I'm sure it was really hard you had a lot of pressures from, your dad's a college coach. You were kind of like in this sport. Were you a pretty independent, like strong-willed kid where it was, because I think a lot of people would just kind of, hey, let me get through high school and just finish this, even though I don't like it, because there's a lot of pressure to stay in this. What made you finally decide, like, hey, I'm going to say something and actually make an action to quit the sport?
Ryan, my wife, is in the other part of the house. Can I go get her and she can answer that question? Is John strong-willed?
Yeah.
We'll get Karen. I mean, I asked her out when she was 16 and I was 18. I think she knows me pretty well. Uh, I am the youngest of four, which speaks something. As a baby, I was the class clown, the comedian in the family. Our family was definitely dysfunctional. I won't get into details, but we had our issues and problems. I did in many ways some of my own things. I didn't always conform. I never slipped into, drinking or pot smoking or cigarettes. I was never that kind of kid. My brother did that. Okay.
Yeah, that
One of my
covered.
brothers was the black sheep, but I was the good sheep. But I definitely had a desire to do things my way, probably from the age of 5 on up. Okay. So then I go through Cornell. My uncle, who worked for DuPont, coaches me through the resume process, the interviewing process, and he says, you should choose Cargill. Cargill was the big company that I chose to go work for out of Minnesota. And so I chose Cargill. But then 3 months in, my wife has a diary from the fall of 1980. You know what it says? John is bored at his job. I'd been there 3 months. I'm already bored, sitting at a desk 8 to 5. Okay. So I stayed 5 more years. But one day I did something millions of people never do. I quit. Now I know this is a different generation. Back in 85, boomers didn't just quit. A salaried position, good company, benefits, $27 a month healthcare. How about that? Okay. We didn't just quit our jobs because we were supposed to come in and stay for 30 years and get a gold watch at retirement. But there was something in me, Ryan, that just said, no, I'm not happy. This isn't fun. I'm not feeling fulfilled. My self esteem is on the floor. And I quit and signed on with this training company to sell training. And, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That's one of the best statements ever. The student is ready, the teacher appears. And two mentors appeared in my life when I was 27 in 1985 that taught me to sell, to teach, to facilitate training, to present to groups. They built my confidence. When I went out and made big training sales, for the first time ever, I felt like I was winning the New York State Championship, something I never even got close to. Okay. I never even went to the New York State Championship. So suddenly at age 27, 28, 29, 30, I'm coming into my own, all because I had good mentors and I had chosen to take a huge risk and quit that company and go sell training, video-based training on commission. When people said, I wouldn't do that, I said, well, I'm doing it.
I think that story, you were already practicing the personal accountability at that point in your life. A lot of people would have sat in that job. This is happening to me. I'm a victim of this situation I don't like. And you went out, you took it, grabbed life by the horns and quit your job. And now everything else is history.
That was a PC way to say that, Max.
Yeah. I'm doing good here.
And then 10 years later, after selling training for 10 years and making more money than we'd ever dreamed of selling training, it's a very lucrative, profitable business, training is. I decided one day to quit my mentors and I said, see you guys. And all of a sudden I set up shop as QBQ Incorporated and went out and started speaking on my own. So that was another time at age 37. I took another risk. So I'm not a real conformist, but I'm not a real renegade. I'm probably somewhere in the middle.
That is awesome. I want kind of one more. This is a question more broadly speaking. The way I think a lot of society has shifted is to a lot of things are happening to you.
Yeah.
The self accountability is not, at least on a very broad picture, not pitched the way I think it used to be. I think everyone could do with a little more accountability. How can we, as help influence society as do our parts, asking the QBQ, we're not going to be a victim of the society that doesn't pitch accountability. Like, what can we do to start it? Because I think everything is happening to people right now. It's always the government's fault or the boss's fault. It's not, no one's asking, what can I do?
I tell young people all the time, do these things and you will stand out, which makes you outstanding. So, I mean, like I have a CEO a few weeks ago who said, John, I hire young people and they come to work and they want a gold star because they wore the correct shirt that day. I talked to a Dairy Queen manager and she says, I can't keep people for more than 3 hours because these teenagers can't stay off their phones. I talked to a Kroger manager and says, I can't even coach these young people because they get offended if I tell them what they did wrong. I spoke for a restaurant in North Carolina a month ago, and they told me that during a shift, managers are afraid to confront their servers and let them know they did something wrong because the server might quit and walk right out during their shift and never come back. So this is what we're seeing in a lot of young employees. That's all I'm saying. Okay. So we teach
That's
people,
true.
be different. Take that coaching. Listen to your manager. Understand they're the boss. Have respect for the organization that employs you. Do these right things. Come in 2 minutes early. Stay 5 minutes late. I had a retail store manager just told me a week ago. See, I go out and I ask all these questions. He said, I don't know if we've ever fired anybody since we opened 5 years ago for incompetence. We have to fire people because they show up an hour late and they don't care. I mean, what the heck, for a boomer, it's like unimaginable that you show up an hour late for work and you don't care. So the message to other young people is be 5 minutes early, stay 5 minutes late, go the extra mile. You will stand out. That will make you outstanding. That will make you different. And don't be offended by words. And we could get into that for an hour. But
Yes, we
stop
could.
looking to be offended. I have a son-in-law who runs a library, and they're doing training that I won't mention that is teaching people how to be offended.
Yeah.
I say, let's teach people just the opposite. Let's teach people to not be offended. Be strong. Somebody says something stupid, write it off. Move on. Be your best. Do your job. Ask, what can I do to be a better person today? So we could go on and on. I told you guys before the interview started, you wouldn't have a problem with me talking. Has that been true?
Absolutely. But I couldn't agree more with anything you just said. I think you said it better than I could, but I think we could all spend a little less time being offended, a little more time working on ourselves, a little more time being strong, being a little tough. I think to your point, you probably not enough people saw therapists when you were our age, and now it's swung the other way, and we're seeing a therapist for the wrong reasons, or making mountains out of molehills. So I think, I couldn't agree more with what you just said.
I just want to say I respect you guys because as wrestlers who really achieved a lot, you actually stuck with it and you did things that I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't lift the weights. I wouldn't run 5 miles. I wouldn't do the hard work. And we talked about why, because I just didn't love the sport. But when I found something I loved, selling training, speaking to groups, teaching others, then I did the hard work. So that's an important point. When you find something you love to do, it's easier to do the hard work.
Yeah,
That's so true.
I like that a lot too. And I don't know, Max and I talk about this a lot, but I really think, and it's funny, like growing up, you see different friends, different teammates, different whatever. And seemingly you come from very similar socioeconomic backgrounds. You're kind of in the same area. You go to the same schools. You have the same general opportunities. And people branch out and do very different things with that. And I think it's interesting to see, the people that consistently do just like little things, like you're saying, showing up on time, following up with an email, doing little things, it stands out a big amount. And those like little things stack day over day, week over week, month over month, year over year. And I think we've always talked about like consistency kills, but I also think it's that personal accountability to have that consistency and continue to stack those good habits. And I think that was something I thought about a lot during this book, just reading it and talking to you. But the other thing that I think shined through, and you mentioned it briefly, but we didn't really talk about it. How much did like your faith play a role in this. Your dad was a pastor for 40 years. You talk about servant leadership. I think when I think about some of the best people that I know, I think about, people that just embody servant leadership where they're, they do anything for you. And they're not going to be taken advantage of, right? They're not just yes men, but they're like, if you have that strong relationship with them, you have mutual respect and you need help. You have those people in your life that you're like, they would drop everything and help you.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a valuable trait, but how did you think about that? How did that influence this? And what does your faith play, in your everyday life now?
I was born in 1958. That's the year my dad took a layman's job. He was going to be a lay pastor for 6 weeks. It turned into 27 years. And then he moved to another church and preached for 15 years. So he preached for all the years I was alive until he passed away. So faith was an integral part of our life. But see, Christians aren't perfect, but they do have strong standards. They do have those absolutes. They do have a faith to fall back on. QBQ, flipping the switch, my material. Every Christian I've ever met who's read the books can say they can trace it back to the Bible, but we don't quote the Bible in those books because guess what? Corporations wouldn't buy it.
Uh-huh.
So I can tell you privately, and all your amazing listeners, QBQ is really based on the book of Matthew 7:1-5, where Jesus said, before you remove the speck from your wife's eye, Max, remove the beam from your own. In other words, before you try to change your boss, your colleagues, your coworkers, your friends, your spouse, look in the mirror. That's what Christ was saying in Matthew 7:1-5. QBQ teaches that, but we do it in such a way that we can go out and talk to Merck Pharmaceutical and State Farm and all these great companies because we don't quote the Bible. We just teach the underlying principles. And many people of faith sense that.
I love that you Trojan horse Christianity into this.
Corporate America. Yep.
We need more of that too.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say that. Now that we're talking about it, my son-in-law is a pastor. My other son-in-law is a pastor. My brother-in-law is a pastor. My dad was a pastor. We've got pastors everywhere in this family.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. So if people could only get one idea from your content, what do you hope that would be?
The greatest takeaway from this material is something I did not come up with, but it's in the material and it resonates with people, and that is, I can only change me. Now, I just said something people go, oh, is that it, John? No. That's everything. Are you frustrated with your colleague, your coworker, your boss, your spouse, your friends, whoever? Are you frustrated with them? Are you angry and you want to go, why don't they do this? And when is she going to do that? Today you say, how can I let go of what I can't control? The inverse, like a reversal, like doing a reversal on the mat, to reverse the question. Instead of asking, why don't they do something different, to turn it around and say, what can I do to change me? That is incredibly powerful. I've had countless stories of people coming up to me saying QBQ saved their marriage because they were fighting all the time. And one of them read QBQ, went home and said, you know what, honey, I'm sorry. I've been trying to fix you. I'm done trying to fix you. I'm going to work on me. And that's the greatest takeaway from QBQ. And I need to add one other thing because of Max being on here. My last 2 years at Cornell, I coached middle school wrestling. And that's another place where I found my niche. See, I didn't know that at the time when I was coaching, that I would lead to later teaching and training, but it's really the same process. And ironically, today I've got 2 Facebook friends since 1979-80. Facebook friends today who were on my team. So when I was 22, they were 14 and I was their coach. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. Yeah, I mean, coaching is one of the ultimate forms of servant leadership, management. All of the above.
I probably yelled too much.
That's okay. Just passionate.
I can only change me. That's the best message here. Everybody, if you're thinking about trying to fix someone, just today say, I'm done. That's discipline. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to work on myself.
That's awesome. I think that's amazing spot to wrap, John. I really appreciate it. This was amazing. Can you tell everybody, we'll link some stuff below to your book, to your website, but where can people find you?
It's so easy, qbq.com, just qbq.com. Come visit. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thanks, guys.